When his mom looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You'll never be good enough for my son," I smiled like I didn't already sign his paycheck every 2 weeks. I wish I was kidding. But this woman, this prim, pearl-wearing, wine-sipping tornado of judgment, had no idea who I really was. My name's Natalie. I was born and raised in Atlanta. My parents owned a tiny bakery and taught me to hustle like rent was always due tomorrow. And it paid off, because now I own the fastest growing lifestyle brand in the country. But when Jake introduced me to his mother, I left all that out. I wanted her to like me, not my resume. Big mistake. See, when I first walked into that dinner, she looked at me like I was the help. She had this smile, tight and fake, like she was doing me a favor by letting me breathe the same air. Jake was excited, though. He thought we were going to have this sweet bonding moment. Wrong. The moment I sat down, she asked me if I planned to work after marriage, like being a wife was my career goal. Then she asked me if I knew how to cook. Not, "What's your favorite dish to make?" No, just, "Can you even cook?" Jake tried to jump in, but she waved him off. She was determined to find something wrong with me. She asked me where I grew up, what my parents did, where I went to school, and every answer I gave seemed to make her more and more annoyed. She didn't like that I didn't go to an Ivy. She didn't like that my mom still lived in the same house we grew up in. She especially didn't like that I didn't come from money. And then, I kid you not, she pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "Jake needs someone who can elevate him, Natalie, not someone who's just surviving." Oh, she thought I was surviving? Let me be clear. I could have bought the wine she served 10 times over. I could have bought her house. But I said nothing. I just smiled, nodded, and offered to help with the dishes. That seemed to confuse her more than anything else. Jake didn't hear what she said. I didn't tell him that night either. Why? Because I was playing the long game, and I knew this woman was going to write her own downfall. Now, here's the part she really wasn't ready for. Jake had just left his law firm job because he wanted to start a new company. He had passion, but no clue how to get it off the ground. So guess who helped him build it from scratch? That's right, me. But I did it quietly. I gave him the blueprint, connected him with my network, taught him how to pitch, how to negotiate, how to lead, and I never once made him feel small about it, because I believed in him. His mother, she thought he was making the biggest mistake of his life. She even told him I was probably the one convincing him to quit because I was lazy and looking for a sugar daddy. I wish I was exaggerating. But this woman straight up told her son I was a financial liability in heels. Now Jake was loyal, but he was also raised to not question his mom. So for a few weeks, I could feel the tension between us. He started second-guessing things, asking if maybe he should go back to the firm, if maybe this wasn't realistic. But I stayed patient, because I knew what we were building was real. And sure enough, within 5 months, his startup landed a 7-figure angel investment, thanks to a pitch deck I designed and an intro I set up at a networking event she said was beneath someone with real class. The irony? She found out about it from Jake's LinkedIn post, which I also wrote. That's when the calls started. Suddenly she wanted to have lunch with me, said she was misunderstood that night, even sent me a book about blending families with grace. But you know what? I wasn't petty. I agreed to lunch. And that's where the story takes a turn she never saw coming. She showed up to lunch wearing pearls again. I swear she must think they give her moral superiority. I picked a nice spot downtown, not flashy, just classy. Brick walls, soft jazz, farm to table. The kind of place where powerful people meet without trying to look powerful. She walked in, gave me that same tight smile, and said, "You look, well, I can see success has been good to you." I just thanked her and pulled out her chair. Then, and this still blows my mind, she reached across the table, gently touched my hand, and said, "I owe you an apology. I may have judged you too quickly." You think? But here's the kicker. She didn't stop there. She added, "You have to understand, I've spent Jake's entire life making sure women didn't take advantage of him. almost choked on my sparkling water. It wasn't an apology. It was a justification wrapped in pearls and passive aggression. I leaned in and said, I understand. You raised him to be careful. I was raised to be unstoppable. Guess we both did our jobs. She blinked. Hard. I didn't say it with attitude. I said it like a CEO addressing a boardroom. Calm, clear, and in control. Because what she still hadn't realized was, Jake wasn't just my fiancé anymore. He was now a co-founder in my company. And yes, I held majority ownership. After that lunch, the calls became more frequent. She'd ask how the company was going. She'd send links to interesting articles about being a female entrepreneur, like she was suddenly rooting for me. It was bizarre, but I knew what she was doing. She thought if she showed support now, she could rewrite the past. But I don't forget. Especially not the night she cornered me in the hallway at her house and told me I looked cheap in red. I wore red on purpose to our next family dinner. A power suit, belted, tailored, jaw-dropping. Even Jake did a double take. And then he made the announcement. We were expanding, launching a product line. And guess who was going to be overseeing the entire strategy? Not him, me. He looked straight at his mom and said, Natalie's leading the charge. She built most of this. I'd be lost without her. I swear if looks could kill, I'd be 6 feet under next to her unshaken belief in superiority. But here's the part where you realize karma has a sense of humor. A month later, Jake and I threw a launch party for the new line. Media, investors, influencers, the whole works. We booked this insane rooftop venue in Manhattan with views that made people forget how to blink. And guess who showed up uninvited? Yup, his mom. She floated in like she owned the place, dressed to the nines, clutching a glass of champagne she clearly didn't pay for. She waltzed over, told Jake how proud she was, then turned to me and said, I always knew you had potential. I couldn't help it. I laughed, out loud. Not because I wanted to be mean, but because she really thought we'd all just forget what she said to me at the beginning, that she tried to sabotage us. That she told her son I was a financial black hole in stilettos. So I leaned in, again, all calm and gracious, and said, Thank you. You were part of the reason I pushed even harder. Sometimes doubt is fuel. Then I excused myself and walked to the stage, because it was time for speeches. Jake gave the first one, short, sweet, all love. Then he handed me the mic. And that's when I told the crowd exactly what this journey had been. Not naming names, but dropping breadcrumbs. I remember when someone told me I wasn't good enough for the man I loved, that I wasn't from the right family, didn't have the right background. I smiled, because I knew. They had no idea what was coming. I looked out at the crowd, saw her standing there, frozen. And now, the man I love is not only my partner in life, he's my business partner. But he still calls me one thing more than anything else. I paused. Let it breathe. Boss. The place went wild. Her face. Priceless. But that wasn't even the best part. Because the real shock came 2 weeks later, when I showed up to a meeting she never expected me to be part of. She sat at the head of the long oak table like she always did. Confident, composed, convinced she was in control. It was a private board meeting for a local nonprofit she chaired. One of those legacy groups where old money meets old opinions. They were looking for a major sponsor to help fund their new female empowerment initiative. The irony was thick. Jake had mentioned the organization to me months earlier. Said they were trying to modernize, that they needed real money and fresh ideas. So when one of the board members reached out about our company becoming a potential investor, I said sure, anonymously. I didn't want fanfare, I wanted impact. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted a front row seat when the curtain dropped. So there she was, running the meeting like a pro, reading off her notes with that same clipped tone she used on me the first time we met. And now, she said, we're honored to welcome a representative from the new lead investor. She's a young woman with a sharp business mind and a passion for lifting others up. Her words started to slow down. Her eyes scanned the list. Then she looked up and locked eyes with me as I walked into the room, portfolio in hand, heels clicking like a countdown. You ever see someone realize they just stepped in their own trap? That was her face. I took my seat, gave a polite nod, and said, "Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to finally be here in person." The room was silent. She tried to smile. It twitched. "I wasn't aware you were involved with the foundation." I smiled right back. "Oh, I've been supporting women for years, sometimes publicly, sometimes behind the scenes, but always with intention." Now, I'm not usually one for public takedowns, but she needed this. Not humiliation, clarity. So when they asked me to speak about our company's values and why we chose to invest, I kept it real. I believe every woman should be judged by her character, not her closet. Her integrity, not her address. I've been underestimated before, called unworthy, even told I'd never be enough for the man I love. And then I looked right at her. But I've learned that when people doubt you, when they label you, it's not a reflection of your value. It's a spotlight on their fear. The room nodded. A few even clapped. She sat completely still. After the meeting, one of the board members pulled me aside, told me they were excited to have someone young, sharp, and fearless on board. Said it was about time someone shook up the old way of doing things. That night, she called Jake, not me. Told him she felt blindsided and embarrassed. Said it wasn't fair that I'd made her look small in front of people she'd worked with for years. Jake? He wasn't having it. He told her, "Mom, Natalie didn't make you look small. You did that all on your own." She didn't speak to us for 2 weeks after that, and then slowly, she started showing up differently. Not better, but quieter. She'd still comment on things, the food I cooked, the way I decorated, but it lost its bite, almost like she knew she couldn't win anymore. It was weirdly peaceful. Jake and I kept building. The company took off. We hired over 100 employees in less than a year. I was featured in Forbes, Business Insider, and even did a TED Talk. I talked about resilience, about being the girl people overlook until they can't. And I didn't mention her, not once, but people still asked, "Was there someone who doubted you?" Of course there was, but I never gave her name power, because that's the thing about people like her. They want you to chase their approval. They want to believe they're the gatekeepers of your worth, but I never needed her key. Fast forward to today, Jake and I are married. Happily, he's my partner in every sense of the word. We travel, we lead, we dream big together. And he still calls me boss, jokingly, sweetly, but also truthfully, because he knows how this all started. He watched me get dismissed, disrespected, and doubted, and then flip it all into a legacy. And his mom? She's still around. She's softer now, maybe even a little impressed. But here's the twist. One day she asked me to mentor someone, not a niece, not a neighbor, her. She looked me in the eyes and said, "I want to understand how you built this, from where you came from." I paused, because that was the first time she ever acknowledged where I came from without judgment. And you know what I told her? "Sure, but we're going to start with something uncomfortable. You're going to have to listen." She didn't flinch. That was new. I told her we could meet once a week, nothing formal, just coffee and conversation. She agreed, said she wanted to reframe her perspective. Her words, not mine. I don't know what changed. Maybe it was the speeches, the business success, or seeing how I moved through the world without needing her approval. Maybe it was just me not needing her at all. We started meeting every Thursday morning. Same cafe, same booth. I kept it real from the start. I didn't sugarcoat things. I told her what it felt like to walk into her house the first time and feel judged before I even opened my mouth. I told her how humiliating it was to be treated like charity when I was building an empire behind the scenes. She didn't defend herself. She just listened. And I could tell it was hard for her to sit in discomfort and not lash out. But week by week, she softened. She started asking deeper questions. Questions about branding, hiring, how I secured capital without family backing. She even asked how I built confidence when I came from a place where nobody handed it to me. That part got to her, because she finally admitted something, that her power had always come from fear. Fear of being irrelevant, fear of losing control, fear of her son loving someone who wasn't a mirror of her own upbringing. It wasn't an excuse, but it was the first honest thing she'd said to me since the day we met. One Thursday, she brought a photo, a black and white picture of her as a kid, maybe 10 years old, standing barefoot in a tiny garden behind a rundown house. She said she used to live in a town where people assumed she'd never leave. But she left, married up, and made sure no one ever saw that part of her again. I buried that girl, she said, but when I saw you, I saw her, and it scared me. That hit me harder than I expected, because maybe we weren't so different after all. But here's where the story turns again. A few months later, we hosted a gala for our company's anniversary. Press, partners, employees, all dressed to the nines. Jake gave a speech. I gave a toast. Then we brought up a surprise guest to present our new mentorship initiative for underserved young women. And out walked his mom. Dressed simply, no pearls. Just a navy blazer, flats, and a look in her eyes I'd never seen before. Humility. She took the mic and told a story no one expected to hear. She talked about bias, about growing up poor and then using wealth to hide shame. She said she'd spent years judging women who reminded her of herself before money made her palatable to the world. And then she said my name. Said I taught her that strength doesn't always wear a suit, that vision doesn't need validation, that sometimes the people we resist the hardest are the ones meant to wake us up. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, especially not Jake's. And then, as the applause faded, she turned to me and said something she'd never said before, not once in all the years I'd known her. Thank you for showing me who you are and for letting me see who I am too. I don't cry in public often, but that night I did. Not because I needed her approval, but because it takes real strength to look in the mirror and admit you were wrong, especially when the world tells you you're always right. We've come a long way since that first dinner. She still says awkward things sometimes, still has opinions about everything from table runners to tax brackets. But now, she asks, she listens, she learns. And Jake? He laughs every time someone asks if it's weird working with your spouse. He always says the same thing. Not when your wife's been running things since day one. People clap, smile, raise their glasses. They think it's cute, but I know the truth. He doesn't say it to flatter me. He says it because it's true. I was never the sidekick, never the backup plan. I was the vision, the fuel, and the foundation. And now, I'm the woman his mom once called not good enough, and the one her son proudly calls boss. Every single day. So to every woman who's ever been underestimated, who's been told she's not enough, not from the right family, not the right anything, let them talk. You just keep building, and when they finally realize who you are, let them watch. Because success isn't revenge, it's just proof. Proof that you never needed their approval, just your own.